Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to the Smart Mobility Revolution, the impact of mixing the right ingredients. We have a panel, 4 important panelists. I'm going to announce them one by one in no particular order. And I just named their name and affiliation, title and affiliation, and I will let them to introduce themselves to do a better job, and also in case I'm not pronouncing the names properly. My name is Carlos Cardillo. I'm the director of the Nevada Center for Applied Research, a center that is part of the University of Nevada, Reno in the United States, and is sponsored by the Governor's Office of Economic Development. The participants, the panelists, as I mentioned in no particular order, will be Asaf Biderman. He is the founder of Super Pedestrian. Asaf. Jacob Bansgar, Chief Executive Officer, ERITCO, and President of the Mobility as a Service Alliance. Jacob, welcome. Johan Jungwirth, EVP Mobility Services, Volkswagen Group of America. And Nishant Arya, co-chair and CII, GBM Group. Okay, so the scope of the panel, 4 ingredients, 4 main components: connected, shared, and autonomous. This is just main components. These are main components, and there is more to it. There are subcomponents. There is always surrounded by efficiency. There is always surrounded by safety. And also, we have to consider the social, the economic, and the legal impact that implementing any of this technology in any society will bring along. So we're going to get started. I think the format we're going to be using is electric components will be the first topic we're going to start talking about. And I'm going to ask different questions. Electric vehicles projection is drastically increasing, and many large organizations are betting that the future is electric. Lower price in lithium-ion batteries, as well as the regulatory pressure in states such as California or countries like France and Norway, have solidified the place of electric vehicles in the car market. Although this creates a great opportunity, it appears to come with great challenges. The industry is just beginning to understand and confront how proliferation of electric vehicles will change the way we drive. So, Johan, I'd like to start with you. Do you believe that the EV proliferation will dramatically change the way we drive, and will the lack of charging infrastructure will be a setback for the industry?
So, I live in California, and as you can imagine, basically, I lived through 7 years of EVs coming into the market and being truly ubiquitous. And I have to say, during my time, at Apple 2014, 2015, I drove a Tesla Model S. I'm driving now my 4th e-Golf actually since. So basically, I'm all in on electric. And I have to say, I can't imagine a world without gas stations. I have to say, you get used to it so quickly if you have, of course, a way to charge. I have to say, California, clearly, it has been driven, it was interesting, actually, by companies. So each company, which wanted to be a good corporate citizen and a good citizen, basically they installed charging infrastructure for their employees, next to the handicap parking, close to the entrance. So the answer is clearly yes, and I have to say, I think around the world what we will see, this will happen. So companies will, add the infrastructure so that their employees can actually charge, and then actually kind of the public parking spaces and train stations and basically parking at airports and so on followed suit. And I mean, it's clean, it's emission-free, it's also so much more fun to drive. I mean, the acceleration you get, the torque you get, you know, starting at zero speed, it's just amazing. And also, you know, just driving by, you know, small children or children, you know, in a stroller sleeping, you know, not waking them up, just being kind of on a magic carpet. I have to say, this is for me the future, and I see this proliferation. Of course, the infrastructure needs to be followed around the globe. And that's, let's say, a prerequisite for this to be ubiquitously available everywhere, but there is no way back.
All right, thank you. So if we continue with the infrastructure, for the electric vehicles to dramatically expand, consumers need to have access to this charging infrastructure that we're talking about. But before investors are going to be willing to put some money into these infrastructures, they want to be certain that there will be some significant demand. So here we're looking at who came first, the chicken or the egg type of situation. And Jacob, I'd like to ask you this question. As a mobility as a service expert, do you find this statement that somehow accurate? And what are your thoughts about this?
Well, from a mobility as a service perspective, it will probably not be up to the individual to look for the charging opportunities. It will more be a service provided by a service provider. And so that means that you are having access to an electric vehicle when you need it for your transport split, and there you will see suppliers of these services making sure that their vehicles are being charged in the city. When you talk about the push for electromobility, we see at the moment a strong push from cities, from countries throughout Europe, who are setting already now some targets for when to give up the conventional internal combustion engine in the city. And that has a huge impact on the demand for traditional vehicles, and that of course is pushing to a certain extent to the electric vehicles. But if you don't have the charging infrastructure, I know that the vehicle manufacturers are working also of the range of these vehicles. So today it's mostly in the perception of the consumer that, yeah, but I need to. I'm traveling 300 kilometers, so I need to be able to charge on the way, but that is not really the case if you can charge in the beginning, at the end of your journey. So there are a lot of developments we've seen in Norway where they actually provided the infrastructure, and there, of course, also with the incentives, there was a huge and fast take-up of electric vehicles. This is costly for the state to do this. They can afford it in Norway, but they cannot afford it in all countries in Europe, where they're also depending of the taxes from traditional vehicles. So from a mobility as a service perspective, it's a matter of you are expecting a certain service level when you want to have access to a car, and therefore you don't really care about the charging facilities, because that is up to the service provider to show the customer that there's the necessary infrastructure.
So you think the service provider is the one that is going to take care of this infrastructure?
That's how it is in many cities today, at least.
Yeah.
And I think that will be more and more in the future, because as we heard in the beginning about what the future vehicle is, it's connected, it's more and more automated, and it's electric. And at the end, who wants to own this vehicle? So you want to have access to these vehicles, but do you really need to own the vehicle? Or do you do like you do in many other areas? You just you forget about this asset standing unused, and you just have access to it whenever you need it.
Okay, thank you. So communities across the globe are looking to replace their diesel buses, ushering in what some analysts predict will be a boom in electric fleets. But transit agencies doing the buying are more cautiously due to existing challenges such as high cost, limited range, and an unproven mass scale model. So, Nishan, JBM Group is also developing electric buses. Do you think that these challenges are real? And are there any other challenges to consider?
See, the benefits which you have with electric buses is that they are either tangible and intangible. If I just look at the tangible benefits in the first phase, at that point, the operating cost of an electric bus is about 20 to 25% of a normal diesel IC engine bus. At the same time, because the number of moving parts, which are about 1,800 moving parts in a normal bus, reduced to about 18, right? So the serviceability, the requirement of service centers, spare parts over a period of time also reduces substantially. And the functionality of the vehicle becomes very easy because at that point they are able to really use the vehicle. There's the power generation source, there's a consumption pattern, and based on the operating pattern, you can really justify. But because of challenges you've mentioned, because in certain cities, they are not able to value the intangible benefits because with every electric bus, if you compare to a diesel bus, it's able to reduce about 1,000 tons of CO2 and 350,000 liters of diesel over a span of 10 years. Yeah. So in that case, people go for gross cost contracts where they pay on per kilometer basis in certain countries. And there, because the operating cost sets off the initial high price of the bus, and still you are able to make the most of it. And if you see over a span of 5 to 10 years, the cost of the vehicle vis-a-vis the existing cost which you'd have with a comparable premium city bus service would be almost the same. Very insignificant difference would be there in that case. And that's why even in India or a few other parts of Asia, what I see that the governments are really looking forward to this, because with the public transport solution, you are also catering to the masses at large. A common man is able to get that service. And here I have not even mentioned the benefits of NVH. So the noise pollution and the other pollutions which are there, which people are not able to really cater to in certain cases. So city corporations are really combining in many cases parking lots with electric vehicles, like you see in Amsterdam or a few other cities where the parking becomes free for electric vehicles. The charging infrastructure is such that across probably 5 or 10 bus stops, or every bus stop, the bus would charge for like 10 seconds or 1 minute or 30 seconds, depending on the operating pattern they have, which reduces the size of battery, and therefore the dead battery weight is not there in the vehicle. So I think all these benefits are available. And if you divide it into an operating pattern and it's seen on a TCO basis, total cost of ownership, then it's a win-win situation for everybody.
Do you think the power grid will be able to handle the increased electricity that will demand cities with entire fleet of electric buses in addition to the electric vehicles?
Yeah, I think that should not be a problem because today the buses are such mode of transportation where you have the buses parked in a depot or they go to a terminal. So if you have fixed infrastructure at depots and terminals, then in that case you do not need citywide distribution of charging systems. And even if you have at different bus stops, for that you could create off-grid power solutions at the bus stops, which would not need to be necessarily every single bus stop, but probably every 10 kilometers or 15 kilometers or 5 kilometers. And since it goes into a loop, so you get those infrastructures to be used quite well. So utilization factor would go up substantially as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So before we move to the connected component, I'd like to have some interaction and see if the audience will have any questions about the electric vehicles, electric grids. I think you're going to have to scream, but I see a hand up there. Any question, please, for any of the panelists?
Sure. So, yeah, so actually that's a very good question. So what happens is that a battery has a life of about 25 years. and the first 10 years, the battery gets to about 80% DOD. And after that, even the SOC level is available up to 80%. And the batteries are used as an energy storage backup in a static usage condition, either in remote areas where you wouldn't have grid facilities or where fluctuation is very high and the supply and demand doesn't match. So it is a very good ecosystem perspective, which is taken over a 25-year horizon. And post 25 years, there are battery recycling facilities which can be very well set up. So in an integrated perspective, if you look at it, you see it from a well-to-wheel perspective. In a well-to-wheel perspective, what happens when we talk about electric vehicles only, it talks about only tank to wheel because you're replacing the oil with the electric and the electric vehicle is there. But the well-to-tank perspective comes in very clearly because the renewable source should be used for charging that vehicle as well. And that renewable source, in certain cases, would need energy storage. So it's an ecosystem approach where the battery, after a span of 10 years, once the vehicle is not on road, is off-road, the battery is used for the same renewable energy storage, and that generates power where this power is stored in such kind of battery storage solutions, and which is used for charging these buses. So we as a company have deployed such solutions and are deploying such solutions in India and few other countries where we are doing it. And holistically, when you look at it, so your point is very correct and very valid because that's a concern which would be raised later. So today itself, if you anticipate the same and create a structure accordingly, then it will be a wholesome game giving you 25 years perspective clearly.
I hope that answered your question.
Sorry, I didn't get you. I thought your challenge was that what would you do with the battery after 10 years? See what happens, like in India also what has happened, that the government gives a clear roadmap of offtake, because that offtake helps any organization who is investing into that project to get it financed from any financial institution or banks properly. And it gives a 25-year horizon clearly based on which the bank is or financial institution sees that first 10 years this battery would be used here, and there are multiple battery leasing options which get created there. And then the battery has a second life after 10 years, which is used in the energy storage part of it. That's one. Secondly, as I mentioned earlier, the government doesn't need to invest in certain cases if they give a clear-cut contract with certain guarantees for a span of 10 years or 15 years, depending on the vehicle life which you want. And there, different operators, as there are multiple global, I think Conexion or Arriva or others in Chile may be there. So the companies like those, in many cases, are willing to invest into the vehicles, and you get paid on a per kilometer basis with a minimum guarantee model on a daily basis, which adds up to the annual subscription fee.
Okay, so yes. Anybody want to take that question?
You're perfectly right, and I also mentioned that it's very expensive for the state to give the incentives to push the demand, and that is what is happening at the moment in Europe. and at a certain moment it will have to change back. So it already did for some countries when they made the calculations, and I think what they will do now anyway is to push towards electric vehicles, and I think the manufacturers have realized that. If you see their plans for the future, you also see a huge drop in demand for diesel cars, for instance, in Europe. So it has already had the effect that they wanted. The incentive side, they will have to change it. There will be a lot of, there will be a huge amount missing somewhere. So it will change, but then again, then the demand has already shifted, and the supply has already shifted as well. So then, yeah, they will get where they want to go, but it's not through incentives all the way, that's for sure. Well, in Denmark they say that you cannot buy a non-electric car after 2030. So that's kind of 100%. But I think it will happen before. I think it will. I think what we see from the manufacturer side happening now, I think from 25 already there will be almost only focus on electric or well, at least hybrid. So it would be very difficult to find a non-electric, non-hybrid vehicles in the showroom, I think, from 25.
I'm sorry, I think we need to move on to the other components because, okay, a quick question for you. Well, the question is, what will be the demand on electricity when this proliferation starts going on? And I guess a quick answer, I don't have a direct answer because it's very difficult to do that, but one of the questions out there is whether the demand will be so high that the power companies will become the new oil companies because of that particular demand and dominate the market for that. And another question that I like to throw out there, which probably there is no answer, is whether the mining industry will have enough power to produce all the minerals that the manufacturing companies will need on minerals like lithium or cobalt. So that's, I don't know if there is any answer to the question, please.
So in India, we had done this study that what would be the power demand, because every country would have a different penetration and density of electric vehicles. 7% would be the increase in power demand. Today, as a country, we produce about 350 gigawatt of power. If 100% of India, which is about a 4 million car market, 80,000 buses market, 100,000, about a million tuk-tuk market, and more than a million commercial vehicle market converts to electric. And to answer your question on the cobalt or lithium or nickel or manganese, there was a study recently done by one of the consulting firms, one of the big fours, which said that if you use electric in the transition process, which is now goes on for next 20 years, still it will be not even up to 50% consumption of the existing reserves which are available for all these resources.
Okay, thank you. Looks like we need an entire panel on electric only, but if we, no, I'm sorry, we're gonna move to, okay. We're going to move to connected component, and we know autonomous vehicles rely mostly on onboard computers and sensors to navigate. Researchers and manufacturing groups take different approaches to develop autonomous vehicles, and there are no real standards to follow. Asaf, this question is for you. Will autonomous vehicle ever rely heavily on connected infrastructure, or will they continue to rely on onboard sensors and computer being just a standalone robot system?
Look, we worked on autonomy in the previous decade, so I'm not an autonomous vehicle person today. I'm not the best to answer this. You should ask Amnon here in the audience. Look, we know that they're facing today challenges still in dealing with the realities of day-to-day driving, especially in cities, especially weather, but these problems are getting solved. I want to posit a slightly different view at this, which is, let's take a step back and ask ourselves, what are we solving for here? Why are we investing in autonomy? Why are we investing in electrification? And the main pressure that we're seeing, aside from environmental, is a pressure of exploding demand for urban mobility. Exploding. We're today at what, 27 trillion passenger kilometers traveled globally in a year. This is expected to triple by the middle of the century. Whether electric or not, whether autonomous or not, where are you going to fit 3 times more people on the roads in cities, right? That's a fundamental problem that has to do with, number one, vehicle form factor, right? The vehicles need to change. It's not about whether they're electric or not. It's not about whether the driver is a robot or not. Physical form factor needs to change so that you can address trip demand in high-dense areas, number one. Number two is when you deploy tens of millions or millions of tiny vehicles, right, they need to have onboard capacity to take care of themselves, maintain themselves, interact with the environment, but also some level of sort of an oracle view that can maintain them and make them reliable and cheap enough, but B, also worry about things like safety. So I want to just add a dimension here, which is to say, yes, we're all thinking from the framework of I'm a driver today of a gasoline engine car, and tomorrow it will be electric, and maybe day after tomorrow I'll have a robot driver. Yes, but that's not going to solve traffic at all. Actually, at all, right? It's been very well studied that, we specifically at the lab at MIT, before I founded Super Pedestrian, looked at 850 million trips, both in Singapore, New York, later in 45 other countries with the ride-hailing industry. We looked at origin-destination data of individualized trips, tried to combine them into shared pooling, and it's very hard to go above 2 people per car without incurring significant delays per passenger, which means that we're going to have to start to think about these vehicles as multimodal vehicles, tiny vehicles feeding a bigger trunk kind of application. The trunk might be an autonomous van, but we have to really think about this in a slightly different way.
Thank you.
So I would actually like to just quickly answer your question. So what we do see is actually that the autonomous vehicles actually have to have the intelligence on board, right? That's what we are working on. Have the compute you need, have all the sensors you need, cameras, lidars, radars, have actually the ability to make the decisions completely on board. What we do see is in China, to also have an infrastructure layer kind of for some decision making and actually kind of telling each car, which route to take. Like if you have a group of cars, from the same point A to the same point B, they might take different routes. Or basically the infrastructure layer on the smart city layer basically can tell each car to take a different route, so actually to avoid traffic. So that means there is a certain, let's say, intelligence layer on the infrastructure side, but in general, each car needs to be capable to make basically decisions and drive even without connectivity and in forests or whatever other places, and be fully capable of seeing everything surrounded the vehicle and surrounding the vehicle, and have the intelligence to make the right things, so make the right decisions and drive safely.
So Jacob, how long you think it's going to take for municipalities to have the initiative or resources to widely deploy this robust connected vehicle infrastructure? I mean, vehicles are going to start populating the streets, and municipalities have to deal with that, not only with the data,
Well, first of all, it's a matter of what kind of connectivity we're talking about and what kind of automation we're talking about. So today you have a world of some things everywhere, where you have some support systems, you have some intelligence, some connectivity in the vehicles that are available everywhere. And then we are moving towards what I think will be more everything somewhere. And that means that there will be many years from now before you will see a mix of highly automated, highly connected vehicle with non-automated, non-connected vehicles. This mix is a very difficult part, and that is what you're talking about if you talk about the cities and the authorities, how they will deal with it. We had a roundtable discussion about this all morning, and
That's
and
correct,
therefore
yeah.
let's not open up that again. But just to say that we will very soon have shuttle services and other fully automated services that will run in cities. But that will be only somewhere. It will, when it comes to the connectivity, one thing that we didn't discuss much this morning, but one thing which is a big issue when it comes to connectivity, whether it's in vehicle or it's with in the infrastructure, for instance, is the negotiations between vehicles, for instance, to let you into traffic, for instance, and just taking a taxi to this place from my hotel this morning, the taxi driver, he negotiated 8-9 times to get into the traffic through the sometimes a bit dodgy route that he was taking through traffic. And that kind of negotiations will have to be done also and this kind of intelligence has to be in automated vehicles for the future if they want to be let into traffic. Otherwise, they'll just be blocked somewhere. Nobody will let them in.
Thank you. Now, if we move on the share component, try to move a little faster because time is flying. Ride-sharing popularity keeps increasing, and in many regions, it is very common and very profitable type of practice. So rapid growth component of companies like Uber, Lyft, Grab, Didi, Gojek caught the public sector off guard without access to information to help guide policies and planning decisions. Nishan, as a ride share is becoming too ubiquitous, are we witnesses the disappearance of taxi companies and eventually urban mass transit?
See, I personally believe that it will coexist because you need all different kinds of transportation solutions. Rather, some new solutions are also coming up. People are going ahead with some pod taxi projects in different cities. People are going ahead with certain other options. And even people are talking about Hyperloop now. We keep hearing about such things. But okay, that's a far-fetched solution. But I think given this scenario, ride sharing is going to catch up further because that's a very convenient solution, a point-to-point mechanism. And definitely it will impact the taxi segment, but the public transportation vis-a-vis buses or trams or metros would coexist because they're giving different kind of solutions. And in one case, you are having a centralized mass transit solution, and the other is last mile connectivity. So, and in certain cases, people do not want a personalized transportation solution. They are comfortable using a common transportation solution. So, I think it is catering to different kind of target audience, and both would be very important for us. Like in India, we have Indian Uber called Ola, which is doing very well, and it is expanding across India and other parts of Asia as well. So I think such companies would definitely do well because the kind of business models, if you're able to align that with the demographic, geographic requirements of any city or the kind of challenges the citizens in that city face, then it is definitely viable. Now, something which at least we are seeing, especially in the Asian region, is that how you are able to connect sustainability as a base, and that leads to scalability. And eventually sustainability, if it becomes a foundation of scalability for any of such models, and you are whether connecting renewable or electric or the ACEs into it, I think that makes it very convenient, because convenient along with affordability is going to lead to the success of such business models here.
I see. Thank you. Continuing with the share component, the proliferation of GPS-enabled smartphones and traffic congestion in larger cities were the key factor in development of micromobility systems, like the e-bike, scooter, to travel about 3 miles or less than that. Asaf, what impact do you think micromobility solutions have on car share or car-based share mobility solutions? Will a rapid increase in these services also become a safety issue for vehicles and pedestrians in urban environments?
So what we're seeing today is something that maybe, you know what, let me take a quick step back. So today, I run a micromobility company. We've been building micro vehicles for about 6 years. Before that, for 13 years, I was at the Department of Urban Studies and Planning at MIT, where we were studying mobility and how you can use robotics and AI to really come up with new solutions given this exploding demand. So if I put my sort of urbanist's hat on for a second, you look at urban form, and different urban forms demand different forms of vehicles. And if I go back to the previous point, it's pretty clear today that if you don't want to curb demand, right, if you want to keep addressing the increase in demand for urban mobility, by the way, cities, produce 83% of the world's GDP? You don't want to curb demand completely or demand increase, otherwise you really hurt the economy. So if you want to address that, it's very clear that we need to develop new capacities on the road. Where is the capacity hidden? It's hidden inside the underutilized space within the car. If pooling is not a sort of a be-all, end-all solution for single mode, it becomes a part of a multimodal, seamless trip. Meaning, you walk to the pool, you take a scooter to the bus, you take an e-bike end to end. There needs to be this sort of seamlessness across all modes, and this is where the ride-hailing industry is getting to today. If you talked to them last year, they didn't want to become asset-heavy. Now, with autonomy on the horizon, with companies like Mobike, and now there's startups in the United States doing micromobility, users voting with their feet, it's very clear that customers want it. Some say that we'll have as many as 50% of trips within a decade and a half in micro vehicles. Now, it makes sense, right? You need to move a lot of people through the roads. You want a vehicle that's as close as possible to the size of a human.
What about the safety? You think, I mean, you see scooters with 2 people in, no helmet, going on the same lane with other vehicles. Do you think we need some sort of regulation or some sort of
So, look, it depends on where you are. First of all, this particular place is different from the rest of the world.
You'd be surprised.
where you can ride on a pavement and things like this. So yes, there is when you're blending different scales of vehicles together, right? Some are, bigger and heavier than others. Clearly, there is a conflict, right? Now, if you look at places where, let's say, just bicycles have been used for a long time, right? There have been, they've identified ways of letting these vehicles blend, and actually it ends up being partly infrastructure, other parts educating drivers to live with cyclists, and other part is actually having places which have no cars, right? So we're seeing more and more bike infrastructure and now scooter infrastructure being put throughout the world. I think the key question, so regulatory is, Europe is leading the way, but regulatory is taking place as we speak. I think the other important factor is that the vehicles that we're now seeing on the street, they're not purpose-built for sharing, right? The toys you have now for scooters out there in the street, they're just there because the industry exploded in one day and needed to deploy something. But these vehicles are going to evolve, right? The wheels are going to grow bigger because they're smaller than potholes. The vehicles are going to be a lot smarter internally from the standpoint of onboard processors to be able to actually not hurt the passenger irrespective of accidents. There's a lot more to go through from the standpoint of vehicle safety. Number one, it's happening as we speak, but also connectivity, micro vehicle to car, right? It's a tough problem to solve because people are splitting lanes, but there are isolatable problems there that you can start to address. So it's a combination of infrastructure, education, and sort of short-range communication between vehicles.
Thank you. So now we move on the autonomous component. And B2X today includes vehicle-to-vehicle and vehicle-to-infrastructure communication. B2B communication will keep cars from crashing into one another, and B2I could have cars informing traffic lights that they are approaching the intersection. Jacob, this question is for you. What do you think are the main issues on getting these radios into all vehicles and making them all capable of communicating with one another across vendors, across cities, across different platforms?
There are several issues. The regulatory aspect, of course, that's something that is based on trial experiences. We want to be confident that this works before we introduce this into our mobility system. There's a big fear of something going wrong. Again, this morning we discussed this. How many fatalities does it take before people back out of the development of autonomous systems? And there we all think very few fatalities. We accept 25,000 fatalities a year in Europe in the traffic today, but it would be hard to imagine that we will accept 10 fatalities with an autonomous vehicles happening in a week before you stop the developments. So that's one, the regulatory side. The sensors, the industry is more or less ready. We have the multi-branding issues, so the communication vehicle to vehicle across brands is something that we work on. When it comes to, for instance, truck platooning, we are working on that Volvo and a Scania can communicate together. Not only Volvos can drive in a platoon through Europe, but those are all. It's all something that can be solved. What we need then as an additional step is we need to have the user awareness of these systems. When they have tried the systems, that's our experience. When we have demonstrated to end users how this works, in the beginning they are very scared of this, but there's no driver, there's nobody in control, and then when they have tried it, they forget immediately and they sit and check their emails. And that's our experience. So we have to have much more trial of this, and we have to give more consumer interest in having this on market. Then we will have the legislation and the industry working together to follow up on the promise.
Thank you. To follow up on this, we often talk about self-driving vehicles, but probably we don't talk enough about self-driving buses. I'm talking about 30 to 75 seats on the vehicle. However, several companies have already started developing of autonomous buses. And Nishant, as the proliferation of autonomous vehicles occurs, do you see a similar proliferation for autonomous buses?
No, I think autonomous buses will come in the future, especially when they have dedicated routes. And on such routes, you'll see that such buses make a lot of sense because in different countries, there's a big shortage of trained drivers, availability of drivers. At the same time, you want that you have real-time information about the vehicle, the number of passengers, who's coming in, who's going out, to be able to track that. And autonomous, not only autonomous, but the whole ACES technology would be able to fuel the requirement of such buses. And in developing countries where they have very good traffic systems and they have dedicated routes, I think it will be the first ones to go ahead. Like in Seoul, you see that at a given point in time, almost 100% of the people in the city can be in a bus.
Thank you.
So therefore, it is very important to understand that what is the problem a city is solving for and what kind of solutions they give. And they give priority to bus lanes compared to the personal vehicle lanes. And they move at a much faster pace, even though they have a lot of traffic in Seoul. So I think such kind of mechanisms would work depending on the urban planning and the kind of whole city solutions they're looking for.
Thanks. Asaf, you need to add something.
Yeah, just a quick note on this. If we think of of any pooling service as part of a multimodal trip, it's no different than a bus, right? And they're being deployed today. If you look at the Pool Express or the Vias of services, and many are coming up, it's already happening today without the autonomous piece, right? So you're seeing the bus shrinking in size, and you're seeing it becoming agile in size, right? One day it's a 5-seater, one day it's a 16-seater, depending on the need. And it connects with what's called feeders, right? So your feeders can be on foot, on scooter, on e-bike, on whatever, or at the other end. So long as the vehicle form factor is relatively the same, the fundamental challenges of vision and AI are the same as those that will be solved for private automobiles. So there's no reason to believe that you won't apply any kind of autonomous vision system to a shared pooling service. It just drops the price, right? So of course it will happen. And it's already happening today with a non-autonomous piece, practically a bus already.
So we're talking about 4 ingredients, 4 components. The perception is always that autonomous vehicle will be electric, mostly, connected, and also will be some sort of share type of ride. We are looking at mobility as a service type of approach, and I think that's where we're leading, where we're going with all this smart mobility revolution. I believe, and Jacob, I think you mentioned something earlier today, that mobility as a service may be taking over the market for the autonomous vehicles. And I do believe that that will be in a way the case, and most likely the car manufacturing companies will become like the airline model, where we are more prone to be thinking about a service or a particular airline as opposed to the manufacturing group like Boeing or Airbus. So I just leave this note. We are out of time. And thank you very much for being here. And thank you to the panelists for the participation.